you just spent some time in DC this week. On Tuesday, you attended a roundtable and Hill meetings pushing for the Bitcoin Act. You joined 17 other industry members, including Strategy's Michael Saylor, Bitmine and Fundstrat's Tom Lee, and Marathon Digital CEO Fred Thiel. How did those meetings go, and why was it important for you to participate?
Yeah, it was a great experience. It was hosted by the Digital Chamber. And they have been tirelessly advocating for pro-crypto, pro-Bitcoin policy and education in DC for a long time. As a DC native, I lived there for 20 years, and so it was a joy to go back home, see some friendly faces, and make a stand for Bitcoin. Truly believe in the future of Bitcoin, the importance that it will have, not just for me as a person, my family, but for our society. And just always want to take the opportunity to educate the people in power about Bitcoin, what it can mean, the pros, the cons, the challenges, and especially with this Bitcoin Act, just trying to educate and bring awareness to this important piece of legislation.
And the Bitcoin Act, which was introduced by Wyoming Senator Cynthia Lummis and Representative Nick Begich of Alaska, aims to codify President Trump's strategic Bitcoin reserve with law. The president signed an executive order back in March, of course, to create both a Bitcoin reserve as well as a separate digital asset stockpile. Why are you pushing for the Bitcoin Act specifically? Why do you think it's important for the U.S. to have a Bitcoin reserve?
Yeah, so it's nice to have something in law. Executive orders, there's a lot of them, and they can change every couple of years, back and forth, back and forth. As we see in the financial industry, when you have the Securities Act of 1933 still in the year 2025 playing a critical role in our industry, would love to have something like the Bitcoin Act in legislation that will stand the test of time and be here for a long time. So to codify the strategic reserve, I think is important in law. I think it's important because, look, Bitcoin is an important asset. It's a critical asset. I know we're all on different places on our Bitcoin journey, right? I used not to get it, and it took 5 years and it finally clicked. But look, the US, we purchase and hold gold. We do the same with oil. Bitcoin, I think, makes sense. It's in a limited asset. There's only 1.5 million or so still to be mined. A lot of people want this thing. It's going to be a huge part of our future. And I think the US needs to invest in it, hold it, and be a leader in this space. And Bitcoin in general, I think it's so important. It's a better form of money, a fair form of money. I think it can solve a lot of the world's problems, not all of them, but I'm a big believer in progress, not necessarily perfection. And I think the US legitimizing Bitcoin and leading in this space is critical for all of our future.
What else happened in DC this week? In a post on LinkedIn, you wrote that you enjoyed talking to our nation's leaders about Bitcoin and the massively positive impact it will have on our world. You wrote that, quote, decades of fiscal irresponsibility in DC has done, quote, infinite damage to our society and future. Can you elaborate on that and take us through anything else notable that happened during your time in DC this week?
Yeah, sure. So I'm a huge worrier about the federal debt, $34 trillion. What does that look like in 5, 10, 20 years? It's not always the coolest of topics to talk about, but that math is important. And where that story ends, it's scary. And I remember my granddad talking about the same things, and like 30 years ago, my dad talking about the same things. And I guess I'm old now because I'm talking about the same things in terms of like the federal deficit and what that will mean for our future. And Bitcoin, I don't think necessarily can solve everything on that piece, but with this Bitcoin Act, the design is to buy 1 million Bitcoins over the next 5 years, hold them at least 20 years, and hopefully with the march of time and progress in markets that those 1 million Bitcoins are worth a lot more in 20 years, and that can make a real dent in the federal deficit. With Bitcoin in general, it looked like it's interesting. We all are working day in and day out for the US dollar, which can be printed by a push of a button. And it can be devalued in a second by people who aren't elected, who we don't know. And that has a huge impact on things like inflation, income inequality, just makes wars and crime much cheaper when just money can be printed out of thin air. And Bitcoin, I think, helps in a lot of those ways. A fair currency that the people can control and contribute to, and not just a few people in a room somewhere. And yeah, big believer in it. And I recognize like people in those discussions challenge some of these and said, do you really want the government involved in all this? And I think that kind of discussion and debate is great. And we need to incorporate tons of different views and opinions into this thing and just trying to build a better society, not just for today, but forever.
So what's next? Do you have any other crypto-related meetings on the agenda in Washington, D.C. coming up?
Not at the time. Moved up to the New York area, so I'd be traveling less. And so if I hit the road right afterwards with maybe not the most popular thing with the family, but it seems like a lot of good progress is happening on Capitol Hill with crypto. I think the plan is we had the Clarity Act passed the House this summer, and now the Senate is doing their hard job to have their version go forward. At least what you see in the news and the rumors are maybe by the end of this month or so, that bill on the Senate side gets out of committee, and just maybe, sometime this year we get crypto market structure legislation passed, which has been something that's been talked about by us in the industry, I think since like 2017, 18. So the fact that it could actually happen this year on the heels of the Genius Act would be a tremendous achievement and a tremendous help for not just all of us in the industry, but Americans and innovators and investors all around the world.
Yeah, and expanding on that, last time you and I spoke was in July. That was a couple of weeks before the president signed the Genius Act stablecoin bill into law, and we got our first major piece of legislation in the U.S. to regulate crypto. In previous conversations, you mentioned that you were always optimistic this day would come, saying that every year you would say, this is the year we will get crypto regulated in the U.S. And here we are now, finally seeing some major regulatory advancements for digital assets. What's your reaction to what's happening on Capitol Hill, and what do you think has changed since the Genius Act became law here in the U.S.?
Yeah, I'm encouraged. I'm an eternal optimist, which is probably why for like 8 years in a row I said this is the year, but it actually happened this year. And I think a lot of lawmakers are just understanding more and more what this industry means, and that it's not something necessarily in the shadows and sketchy stuff, but these are true people who believe in the system of building a better and fair economic system. I think in the heels of the Genius Act already, you have a lot of companies who are maybe abroad and they've run away from the U.S. already making announcements that they're launching U.S. businesses, U.S. initiatives, and I think that's going to help our U.S. ecosystem, but also create more jobs and more opportunities and just more investment in the U.S. And really excited about that. And that's 6 weeks or so after this bill is signed into law, and hopefully there's much more to come.
And expanding on something else you mentioned, the Clarity Act, many in the industry are now focusing on that bill, which the House also passed in July. The Senate is also working on its own version of a market structure bill, as you mentioned. And Senator Cynthia Lummis told me during an interview in her home state of Wyoming that the Senate will incorporate the Clarity Act into its version. She also said she's hopeful that the U.S. could see market structure legislation become law by Christmas. Do you think that's feasible? And what would this mean for eToro?
Yeah, so this was a popular question in DC at the Bitcoin Advocacy Day, and that generally syncs up with everything that we heard in those meetings, that it's around this time of the year. So maybe we'll have a nice holiday gift for all of us sometime in December with this act finally passing for eToro and other firms in the space, whether you're someone like eToro that's been around for 15 plus years or a brand new startup, having, I guess, lack for a better word, clarity of what type of offering and business you have and which regulators will be involved, and if there's certain exemptions to play, that is huge. We spend a lot of money and stress and time and legal expense trying to figure out if different assets are security, a commodity, if the SEC is involved, the CFTC is involved, and to just move past that and have clear rules of the road is truly priceless. All the lawyers might not love it in the long term, but it will certainly help firms, innovators, and in the end, consumers.
You're making me laugh today. Not only have we been seeing a change coming from Capitol Hill as it relates to crypto, but we've also seen a change coming from regulators, including the SEC. In fact, this week, the agency approved a change to listing standards for crypto-focused exchange-traded products on major exchanges. And according to Commissioner Hester Peirce, the new process would reduce the time and resources required to bring new ETPs to market. What do you think about this development, and what do you think will change now? Do you think we'll see a bunch of new crypto related products come to market? Does this change anything for eToro?
Yeah, I think we'll see more products come to market and it'll be more efficient and quicker. And as eToro is a place, we love to give people options and choice. And we're not going to tell you buy this versus that, but we want investors to be empowered. And even when you're going to a store and you're looking for cereal, you much rather have 50 options or 30 options just instead of one or two. And same thing with investing. I think the more options people can have, the better. And I love the idea that the government is there to make sure disclosures are fair and effective, but it's not the government's job to decide this is what you need or that is what you need or you shouldn't invest in this. Let the products get to the market and then let the people do their own research and let the people decide. I think that's a win for our economy, for just human sovereignty, and just in general innovation.
So, what has changed for eToro in terms of crypto related offerings since we last spoke in July? I spoke with your CEO, actually, Yoni Asia, last month about eToro launching tokenized versions of US listed stocks on the Ethereum network over the summer. How's that going so far? Are you noticing demand for this?
Yeah, it's the buzzword of the summer for sure, tokenized stocks. Right now that focus is largely in Europe, and I believe one day it's going to be here in the U.S. as well. It's something I think that's where our industry is headed in the future. There's not crypto, there's not finance. It's just all just finance, and I think that's a huge opportunity here in the U.S. In light of the SEC guidance, legislation changes, litigation changes. I think when we first spoke back in May at the Bitcoin conference in a very loud room in Vegas, we had just gone from 3 crypto assets to, I believe, 15 or 18. Throughout the summer, we continue to add more and more crypto assets, doing our research, doing our diligence, seeing what the customers want and desire. And now I believe we're up to 111 different crypto assets on our platform. And so we're really excited and proud of that work and proud to give our customers such a great and healthy offering with a wide range of choices. And we will continue to look into that in the weeks and months ahead. We announced to our customers a few weeks ago that staking is coming soon. And so we hope to roll that out in the coming days and weeks as well.